Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline, New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. The campaign has begun in full force, folks, the 2020 campaign for president. Yes, it's still 18 months before the general election. We have a local election before that, but at least 24 candidates, count them, give or take a few dozen, are vying for the Democratic nomination to take on President Trump, and 21 of them are debating over the next two nights. Well, we want to prepare for the first big debates, so we have one of New Haven's sharpest independent political minds here in the studio to help us figure out what to look for. Say good morning to the Reverend Samuel T. Ross Lee of Emmanuel Baptist Church. Thank you so much for coming in, Reverend.
Thank you for having me.
It is a true honor to have you. I will say, just honestly, when I was thinking, whom would I want to hear from more than anyone else about tonight's debates, your name was the first one that popped up, just because of your independent perspective. I want to know what you thought. So,
okay.
Glad you can share this with us. Tonight, and also want to thank Yellow Haven Hospital for financial support for today's program. Tonight is the first of two debates. We're talking Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m., and you can watch it online at the Agent Arsh Center for Performing Arts in Miami. They divided 20 candidates for president into two batches to debate over two nights. So I guess what I'm wondering, Reverend, first of all, is what are you looking for? First of all, are you going to watch?
I'm gonna start watching.
That's what I do too.
I'm gonna start watching.
I rarely watch a presidential debate, except for when it comes to the end.
Right. So I often treat these things like I do basketball and football seasons. I start paying attention to playoffs. I start paying attention to championship games. Unlike tennis, which I pay attention to the whole year. But I usually treat politics like that because you're going to have a lot of posturing. First of all, there are far too many candidates in the Democratic on the Democratic side, obviously because you have an incumbent Republican president. There are far too many candidates, far too many people to pay attention to, and there are far too many unknowns people out there, and people who are known but not really known for the right reason, like the mayor of New York, for example. It's like, can you hold on to that position before you try to start running for
well, I'm kind of glad he's running
president.
Because it's a real gift to reporters in New York, because every article about Bill de Blasio running for president is an opportunity for some New Yorker to have fun being a wise guy and just making fun of his chances in every single sentence.
Right.
It's been pretty funny. But they say you never lose by running for president, even if you have no chance. That you get TV gigs, you get book gigs. Because we're trying to wonder, why is Bill de Blasio running? He's very unpopular in his own city.
Right.
They love writing about how the candidates whom New Yorkers are for in polls are all beating their own mayor.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Maybe I should run if that's you get all these things. That
you should be running. You might get some book deals.
Yeah, get book deals and appearances and show up on MSNBC. What is it?
MSNBC.
MSNBC, right? And the former presidential candidate, under my name, that sort of stuff.
That could work. Yeah. So one reason I was wondering what you're looking for is because I think you're right. At this point, most of us can't name all the candidates.
Right.
We don't need to, because some are going to be dust pretty soon.
Right.
But I do think there's something at stake here, which is I think the Democratic Party and the non-Trump country at large is trying to figure out, where do we want to go next?
Mm-hmm.
What's it going to take to beat Donald Trump, and what do we want it to take? What kind of alternative vision? Because Donald Trump has the vision right now in America. He stands for a coherent set of principles and a way of campaigning and a way of exciting or inspiring the public.
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats really don't have an alternative to that people are behind as a country. Like, whether it's a lot of visions are being tested out here about whether you focus on the forgotten white male factory worker with conservative views and kind of bring them into a tent, or whether you stand for a really solid different set of principles where government instead of the enemy is we, fixing problems, big problems, and against the very wealthy and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's a lot on the table here that's more important than the individuals, except for what they represent.
Well, I think the Democrats talk like, all too often, they talk like college professors without the I don't know what it is, realization, understanding, or they just don't get it, that most people are not used to listening to college professors. And Donald Trump people say, he speaks his mind, and they don't consider that if somebody who is just completely unaware speaks their mind, you have a statement or whatever they've said doesn't make any sense or doesn't have any credibility, and against the facts, against the truth, that kind of stuff. So speaking your mind is not a virtue necessarily, particularly in this context of a person leading the country. But the Democrats have not figured out in a lot of ways how to speak to persons who are not college graduates, who don't sit around the coffee clutch, houses or the hotels at Harvard and Yale and this sort of thing. And that's why they lose so much, I think.
Do you think part of that's because everyone who writes articles about them, everyone who's advising them, went to college?
Yes.
Often very fancy colleges.
So the the Republicans figured out a while ago, because they were the party of the rich. But they figured out, and they had to, that there's not enough rich people to get you into office. So you have to appeal to another set of people to get you in office, and then do what you want to do for the rich. And in order to speak to that crowd, you have to speak their language. It was Johnson who said, Lyndon Johnson, if I can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best black man, I can pick his pocket every time. That's what the Republicans do.
And it's interesting. I happen to agree with you about this. And the alliance I've seen in that score that's been the most potent is with the white evangelical Christian core. So Donald Trump, who's a lifelong libertine, gets the support, which I think was very intelligent on the evangelical Christian community part in the pure political sense, by promising them the Supreme Court for maybe the rest of our lifetime, to try to get rid of abortion, to beat on gay people, get rid of any kind of advances for black people in the country. So there's kind of an alliance. I always wonder where that alliance might rupture. So now you're involved in the Christian world, you're in the black church, but do you see any inherent tensions between the agenda of the very wealthy, which is advanced by, let's say, the tax cuts, and this kind of evangelical far right-wing social agenda that they've married in order to get the populace behind economic policies that actually benefit the rich?
I don't think they've married them. What I think they do is appeal to a particular section, a particular segment of society for what they want. And I believe that segment stays there. As long as we're getting what we want, we don't really care about the rest of the stuff, which is obvious with the conservative evangelical church that is anything but Christian. We're getting what we want. We're getting the Supreme Court. We're getting the abortion thing and this kind of stuff. We're not thinking about the other stuff. So we pull Trump in. We ignore his issues with women. We ignore the sexual assault accusations and charges and all this kind of stuff, which they didn't ignore with Clinton, by the way, because Clinton was not giving them what they wanted, at least at the time. So I don't think that group says, we got to now combine ourselves with the rich elite. I don't think they think about them. I think they just think about what they want. And so they hold together. And I don't think it's Trump per se, quite frankly, but that whole Republican phenomenon holds together these very disparate groups that really don't have very much in common oftentimes, and don't care as long as they're getting what they want.
And they're getting it.
And they're getting it.
And we're talking about the presidential race here on Dateline New Haven with the Reverend Samuel T. Ross Lee. And we're at 103.5 FM live streamed to newhavenandpenn.org. So the Democrats have to start presenting alternative. For as long as you watch tonight and whatever you might read later, separate from individual personalities, what are you looking for? What do you want to see emerge? What's the message? What's the strategy you want to see start emerging tonight when the Democratic presidential candidates debate?
One of the reasons that the debates don't mean as much to a person like me is because I look for substance, and I don't think you can provide substance in a debate situation, particularly when you got that many people on stage and you have limited time to speak and that kind of stuff. and it doesn't really matter that much to me about what you say. It matters what your record has been. It matters what I've seen you already fight for, and where you have placed yourself politically, whether you benefited from that or you got creamed in that perspective. But if you stood there on that principle, and that's a principle that I agree with, that's where I am.
So now, you mentioned college professors. So every week, a new candidate has his or her moment in the liberal media.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Warren is having her moment. Huge cover story in the Times Magazine. She had one long story yesterday in the Times. She had there were a bunch of other long articles about her. She's a college professor, law professor. She has maybe the strongest record of actual results in terms of taking on big banks, taking on the predatory finance industry. What's your take on what she's offering?
What I like about Elizabeth Warren is that although she's a college professor, law school professor, Harvard Law School professor, she doesn't talk like one. She doesn't talk above the heads of people.
But she also doesn't talk down to them.
And she doesn't talk down, right. But she is plain spoken and she's understandable. And I think that's why she has the best chance, at least to take on Biden. And she's talking about issues that affect real people and things that, issues that people have to deal with, the college, money that, this thing is just ballooning.
Right. She wants to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy, a modest tax on people with over, I think, 25 million in assets or something like that, to fund free college at state universities, to fund massive child care. And she really wants to continue the work she did in founding the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which collected, I think, $20 billion in penalties from these companies that prey on the poor, but now have been dismantled. She wants to expand what they do, and she wants to break up the big tech companies.
But what she also does, because, she says, I want to end all this predatory lending and, people go to college for free. The historically black colleges, the private historically black colleges, known as HBCUs, are saying, hold on, that's going to really mess us up. Oh, yeah, let me get $50 billion over there. So when she talks about these issues, because most of those things could be, heady in certain ways, she talks about them and brings them down to the level of people understanding how this is going to benefit you, as opposed to just assuming that you're going to understand that. She talks about specifically, directly, empirically, how this is going to benefit you who are, not the ultra wealthy, who don't understand the tax rates, who don't understand, all of these things that are going on behind the scenes that help these people. I'm going to change that, but I'm going to explain to you how this change is going to help you. And that's why I think she's one of the better candidates. And frankly, I think she's the best candidate on the Democratic side out there.
What are you looking for tonight with her?
The same.
They'll all be gunning for her because it was a random pick on who goes on which night. So she's the only first-tier candidate tonight in terms of who's showing up in the polls. So she's going to have 10 people. Cory Booker's sort of in the first tier, I guess, but the rest, de Blasio, Delaney, Gabbard, Inslee, they're all going to be going after her, whereas the next night there'll be a few front runners.
Yeah, and I have – now that's interesting because I didn't know who was on tonight. I probably will watch that because I don't see what they can say to her, quite frankly, that is better than what she's saying. Well, the other thing,
what you're going to look for tonight, I think, is each candidate is going to try to use his or her 5 minutes to stand out and have a moment so that then you can raise more money to get to the tier. Yeah,
that kind of thing doesn't really impress me. Your soundbite, your contrived, speech for 5 minutes to,
well,
be
I hope
the person.
They let him mix it up because you were a debater, right? I mean, you in college.
I debated in college, yes.
Competitively.
Yes.
So, what did you learn from that experience that you think could help the candidates know how to come across well in these fora, especially as they get smaller and there are fewer on the stage?
Because we were a small debate team, didn't have a lot of money and that sort of thing. We may have had, I think, 6 or 8 debaters at the, on the whole team. We were debating teams that were behaving like athletic teams. They had a whole group of students on scholarship who just did research, and the other more experienced debaters or whatever traveled.
And was this at Howard?
And this is at Morehouse.
Morehouse.
When I was at Morehouse, but when we went to debate tournaments, that's what we were facing. Like Florida State would be there, and they would have these large boxes and briefcase, those lawyer briefcases that they carry, of evidence and stuff like this. And they got as many people or more people back home doing the research. And these are our best debaters. So these are the people who are traveling, and all of them on scholarship. We had no scholarships. We had no, bench, none of that. So what we always had to do was come up with arguments that were not standard to the evidence that they gave out, the stuff that you get these pages of evidence and stuff based on the topic for the semester or whatever. And we always had to come up with something quirky to make our opponents have to think on their feet and not just be able to pull out another evidence card. So I that's a good strategy. Just don't say the normal thing. Don't say what everybody's expecting you to say. Come out with things that have to make your opponent think on their feet. In this situation, if they are able to chop it up with one another. But in this situation, it seems like the audience and the judge is the viewing audience. And according to how, this stuff works in America, it is that kind of, that statement, that standout, that, where's the beef, kind of.
But that was a one-on-one debate when Mondale said that to Gary Hart, or
no, it wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, they were on stage, and there were several other candidates there.
Okay.
And Mondale and Hart was saying this stuff, and he's like, you keep saying this stuff, but where's the beef?
So Reverend Russ Lee, I guess I was very interested in what you just said. And I'm wondering if that might be good advice after all for them tonight. So you're saying that when you're up against, as a debater at Morehouse, you're up against teams that had a lot more money, had research teams. I love the briefcase. I wonder if that was a prop to intimidate you.
Some of it was, yeah. We knew that. Yeah.
So you said what you had to do was think of an unconventional argument that made them think on their feet rather than go to the well.
Right.
When you're in a field of 10 candidates who all have lots of money and getting all the attention you want, is the answer to come up with a scripted line you're hoping the pundits are going to bring it, or people are going to make a meme on social media? Or is it in fact going to the Morehouse strategy? Is it in fact going to prepare to make some other opponent think on their feet? Or is there just too many people on stage to do that?
Again, the format matters in that situation. The problem with this, and we always had to in debate, you always have to think about the weakness of your argument and the what we call anticipatory refutation. So what are they going to say, and then what am I going to say in response to what they say? The problem with this strategy in that format, and as a presidential candidate, is that each time you debate, you've got to come up with something new, and the media is going to jump on you and say, this person has no consistency, because the media is, dumbs down all too often. So they're going to suggest that the person is not consistent with anything, and they don't have a consistent message. And that's a problem with that kind of strategy.
What about the takedown tonight? They want to take down Warren and be the person who looks more like if you were advising Booker or de Blasio, you'd probably be advising Delaney, Castro, O'Rourke, Ryan. Would you not tell them to go with the Morehouse strategy tonight? Would you tell them to just have that sound bite that's like, where's the beef?
Yeah, those guys need to do that. The question becomes what comes after that, because you're going to have more debates. You're going to be out there. You're going to have press conferences, or the press is going to be, asking questions, that sort of thing. So what comes after that? And is it not just a strategy, but is there some substance behind this? This I've come out of nowhere with this statement, and it stands out, whatever. But what is the substance behind it, and what are you going to do for the next debate?
All right, and we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven with Reverend Samuel T. Ross Lee. So what is the substance you look for? Where do you want to see the Democrats craft as a message and a strategy, beginning with these debates tonight and tomorrow night? What are you looking for?
I'm looking for credible responses to issues that are facing the country. The runaway college tuition. I have a daughter who's a rising senior. So that's important to me. But it's important on a larger scale of whether or not our students can be educated and not be saddled with this huge amount of debt that the government is saddling them with, by the way. That's the government is making money off of this stuff. This is what I learned from Elizabeth Warren.
And now protecting with Betsy DeVos's the cases there. People rip you off.
Exactly.
Man.
Right. And, that sort of thing. I want to hear actually what we're going to do about the disparity in public school, and it's not to me as simple as the schools are as segregated now than they were before 1954. It's not just that for me, because I don't necessarily didn't necessarily agree or don't necessarily agree with Thurgood's response or statement. Separate is inherently unequal. I think that's kind of racist toward black people, quite frankly. If you're not with white people, you're going to be.
I actually do have to see it your way, but I think, to be fair to their argument, some of that is people thinking that, whereas our response is you don't have to be sitting next to a white kid to learn. The other argument is that resources follow because we live in a racist society.
Right.
So would the argument then be, let's not have a racist society then and have resources more equally?
But we have conceded that the only way resources can be distributed is if white people are there. That's where that problem is. So that concession that is unspoken is where the problem is. But the other part for me is this. We keep acting as if these policies that we write up for the country in terms of education is how we bring people up from in very desperate situations as educations go. And when I say desperate situations, I'm not talking about just the students. I'm talking about the students' parents, maybe even the students' grandparents. I watched this documentary, I don't know how long ago it was done, Dan Rather did, on the Detroit schools, where it was an hour, 47 minutes, some documentary. 40% of the adults in Detroit functionally illiterate.
Wow.
So simply just focusing on the students in the school is not enough. We have got to be more creative. We have got to be in the community. And we have got to do things that create a educational and academic culture in communities that have not had that.
Does that come from the federal government? Like, one might argue that the federal government has very little influence on education except to do harm. So under the current administration, I've gotten rid of projections for suicidal gay people getting harassed in school. They've gotten rid of the civil rights investigations of that. They're supporting charter schools and getting rid of investigations of schools that rip people off, private schools. But historically, states have had a lot more influence on both funding and learning goes on. Really, the main thing Obama did, one could argue, was just to give a lot of money to charter schools, in terms of education policy.
It was horrible.
But I'm wondering whether, and here I've been kind of leading up to this, about the intersection between race and economics and class.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the stuff that Warren talks about is asset wealth that might or might not go to some of the core of what you were just talking about, opportunity at the base. So right now in America, I believe the number is that for every dollar of asset wealth in a white household, there's 5 cents in a black household. That goes back to the reparations debate, goes back to predatory lending and access to capital. When we look at issues of racial injustice in our country, and when we tie it to any issue like education, housing, how much of that does have to do with economic policy? So one criticism Bernie Sanders got when he ran was that he saw everything as class. And people who cared about racial justice said to him, sometimes there's just racism that isn't just about class. Black people in middle class get treated worse by lenders and taken more advantage than white working class people. Right. And he argued that disproportionately black people are hurt because disproportionately there was a certain economic class, and that you lift all boats for the poor and working class, and that'll help. Yeah. Whereas Warren's a little more nuanced. She too sees things through class. She sees it through asset wealth, but she does talk about racial discrimination more.
Right.
Other people say that it's not about economics. It's about just purely about race. What do you think?
I think those two things are inherently connected. I mean, when you think about the fact that slavery was a business, we weren't brought over here and treated the way we were because people hated us. That came later as a justification for slavery. Slavery was a business. And so the economic reality was that you used us to build an economic reality and base and riches and wealth for white people that we didn't share and still don't share. So I think those two things are inherently connected. But here's the thing about when you ask the question about, is this a federal government issue? When we're talking about the president, I see the president as, having a national pulpit. And everything doesn't have to be, we're going to fund this, we're going to do this. There's also the possibility Just like Nancy Reagan got up, and not that I necessarily agree with her, and say, just say no, and this becomes a national conversation.
Didn't have great results.
It didn't have great results, but it became a conversation.
Good jokes.
Elizabeth Warren or whomever as president can get up and say, these are the kinds of things that need to happen within the communities, and whatever support can be given them. And quite frankly, I don't see that kind of thing as needing a lot of money. I think it's about attitude, it's about perspective, it's about people understanding that this is not going to happen in terms of the school success, and if this thing doesn't happen outside of the school. The reality of, I had a friend who is, I don't know if you've been following the thing at Harvard, where
who represented Harvey Weinstein?
Right, that's my classmate.
Really?
We went to college together. Went to Morehouse together.
Very interesting.
And
I didn't know he was African American.
Yes, he is. And he and his wife.
Boy,
I married him. I married them.
You married them?
I married them. I blessed their first child. We went to college together. We were at Harvard at the same time. I was there a year before him, but we roomed together the whole 9 yards. Know him for years.
What's his name?
Ronald Sullivan. Now you make me lose my point.
I'm sorry. So you're following that. You talk about the way we talk about race and opportunity and education and the bully pulpit of the presidency.
Right. So, from that particular point, I think the president has an opportunity to create ideas that we can follow within our community, and it doesn't necessarily have to take a lot of money to do it.
The president can lead.
Oh, I remember what I think about when we were at college. He was studying for the LSAT, and he went to LSAT class. He told me about this in the AU Center, which was Morehouse, Spelman, Clark College at the time, and Morris Brown, and some other students from Morehouse took the LSAT classes like at Georgia Tech or on Emory at white campuses. And he said the students who studied at Georgia at Morehouse in the AUC did better on the LSAT than the black students who studied. And there's research, I think someone was telling me to prove that students learn better in communities that are familiar to them.
What is the AU Center? Just it was a
conglomeration. The conglomeration, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark. It's Clark Atlanta now, but it used to be Clark College and Morris Brown, which doesn't exist anymore. So those four, it's the largest consortium, and ITC actually, and Morehouse Medical School now, largest consortium of black colleges in the world. And each school is an independent, entity of it in its own, and that's why people are like, I don't want to go to Morehouse. It's all boys school. First of all, it's all male school. It's all men's school. Second of all, it's not in a all male environment. It's co-ed environment because Spelman is literally across the street, and Clark is literally across the other street, down here. So we had this connection with all these schools. But students being able to come into their community and we create study halls, not necessarily back in the school building. Let's open up the school buildings. No, create study halls in our churches, in homes. Families buy snacks and let the person who's going to be home during that time of year, that time of day, bring the kids into their houses, and they study instead of being out in the street. That's when most kids get in trouble. That's when things happen, that kind of stuff. This notion is something that can be perpetuated and pushed from the pulpit of the presidency without necessarily saying we're going to fund these things. Because once they start funding stuff, then they start controlling stuff. And that's not necessarily good either, because all you got to do is get another president in and say, oh, I'm assigning an executive order to end the funding. And now everything stops.
But we're just getting started on Dateline New Haven 103.5 live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Inner City says, my favorite person to dislike. That's Babs Rawls Ivy writing in. Nice to see the good Reverend speaking truth to power. You all should chat on a regular basis. Thanks, Babs. And Babs is my favorite person listening on the radio, I got to admit. He's the best.
Thanks,
in
Babs.
the business. So what about reparations? That's coming up in this debate.
Yes.
Now, the conventional wisdom, the reason I have you here, because I'm tired of the conventional wisdom.
Okay.
The conventional wisdom is that you need black votes in the primary, so you go as far as you can to get black voters to think you're sensitive to them on reparations. So people like Warren, people like Sanders are saying, well, we definitely got to study it. But that in a general election, you'll get clobbered by the angry white person in the middle who doesn't want to feel guilty about slavery and thinks that's just a nut. The media says it's a nutty outside idea. So reparations ain't going to happen. You can't calculate it, be a mess. Who's going to even prove who depends from a slave? So that these candidates starting tonight have to walk this line between sort of being for reparations study, but not fully embracing it. I guess, I mean, the obvious answer, I guess, to that is you should stand for something you believe in, and people respond to that rather than just playing the game, right?
That's some of the answer.
Okay, give me the rest.
The rest is actually what I said earlier. I don't think you necessarily have to get on a national stage or in these debates and talk about these segmented things. I think when you're on that national stage, these debates, that sort of thing, you talk about the things that you're going to do for the country.
A vision.
Right. You put your vision out, but you also, things that affect the largest segment of people. But as I said earlier, if you go to this segment and say, this is what I'm going to do for you, this is what's going to happen. I don't necessarily think they're going to spend a whole lot of time focusing on what you're going to do for the next group, as long as they're going to get theirs. Because I think that's what's happening with the Republican Party. The poor white people, the evangelical church, which is actually poor white people. It doesn't look like that because what we see is the preachers in the suit and ties, but they represent basically poor white people. Are glad about the so-called moral, what I call moralistic, which is different than moral, are happy about those things. They're not focused on whether or not the rich are getting what they're getting and that sort of thing. They're just happy about they're getting their segment. So I think if you do that, the Democrats will focus more like that and say, this is what I'm going to do for you. And, I'm going to do this over here. You have a better chance than to making the reparation argument, the reparation vision, an argument in a place where people are, not gonna support that.
I feel like it's almost a game with these debates and the daily coverage where you almost get taunted into having to speak honestly about a complicated, important issue, right, while also trying to win at what is a sport through sound bites that are calculated not to offend and to get your attention.
Unfortunately,
it's hard at these debates to talk intelligently. Although I felt that Clinton and Sanders had really intelligent debates. I felt like I really got a lot of issues on that one and where they thought, and I saw like she had some strengths on foreign policy he didn't have. He got to talk at length in a non-attacking way about health care and college tuition. Yeah.
Yes, that did happen. I was, as I was saying, before we started, I think Trump's win is a fluke. I think it's aided by Clinton's bad campaign. She ran a bad campaign. She still won the popular vote. And if it were not for the steeped in racism electoral college, she would be president now. So that is possible to do as it relates to the debates and that sort of thing. Because I think people are listening for their thing. They're listening for what they're looking for. And without, being steeped into the conversation. We have short attention spans in this country.
So here's my prediction about how you stand out in this debate.
Mm-hmm.
I think Andrew Yang is going to be the man. I'll tell you why. He's this really interesting dude. See, there's all these like nerds who are worshiping him now on the campaign trail. He actually did the web and did issues so interestingly that he got registered in the polls and raised a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And his issue is universal basic income.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big Silicon Valley idea. It's very controversial. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But you said, what are you going to do for you? He wants to give everyone $1,000. He says, a lot of these jobs aren't coming back.
Right.
You're going to have to create them or you're going to have to live.
Right.
And we're going to have robots. We always talk about robots.
Right. Right.
It's an interesting, complicated issue as well. He said, when we get factory jobs, there are going to be a lot fewer jobs. We're going to have people running the robots. He says, start with $1,000, which is, I think, almost 2/3 of our entire budget if we did this, to everyone in America every month for income. I think that's the kind of thing in a crowded field that's going to, especially because he has this quirky way. He just seems like this character, this kind of nerdy, techie guy who has a lot on the ball.
Yeah. I think that will, something like that
That's night two.
Could stand out in a situation like this. But as you said, when you start talking about in these conversations with the media one-on-one, and they start pushing you on other issues, you got to talk about that. You got to have something to say about that. The media plays games with this stuff too, and because it's a money-making situation. for them as well. I think obviously, not obvious, but I think it's more than anything else. They're in it for the money. They're making the money off of these things, and they're always, since maybe Nixon is always the reporter trying to do the gotcha thing, whoa, look at what we've done.
Yeah, really tired of gotcha.
It is very, very tiring, but it is still very, very real in these situations, in these presidential situations, and the constant, sort of not letting people finish questions or finish answers and be thorough and deep and that kind of stuff. That's problematic, for our media, because it's not helpful, quite frankly.
So when I think about these stages with tons of candidates on them,
Mm-hmm.
I think about it's the only one I watched, Republican debate in 2015 for the 2016 election.
Mm-hmm.
Trump was one of many people on stage.
Right.
That time, no serious people, or even unserious would-be serious people like myself, thought Donald Trump could ever become president. We turned on that debate, all these people on stage, and he completely dominated it.
Mm-hmm.
He did things I hate. He was making fun of, the size of Marco Rubio's, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Jeb Bush's energy. But he was like picking a sandbox taunt for everyone on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew how to get a camera to himself, being a reality TV star.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked like such a buffoon, saying such wild stuff that you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't stop looking at him.
Mm-hmm.
The camera couldn't stop. And I, as a viewer, said, this is weird. Like you talked about how, you like watching sports. I felt like I was watching sports or
Mm-hmm.
reality TV.
Right.
And it just seemed that on the stage, there was only one person who would even get your attention. Is that kind of, how does that work out in a Democratic debate? They're not going to go up there and make fun of people's body parts.
I hope it doesn't. But I was not as convinced, I think, as a lot of other people that Donald Trump couldn't win this thing, because I'm realistic about what this nation is.
Racist.
Racist, yes, but we're also undereducated, significantly undereducated. And we have been pushing this perspective for a long time.
And it was an anti-intellectual campaign.
Exactly.
That was his thing on Bush.
We have been pushing this thing for a long time, where a businessman, it's usually a man, so a businessman, would be a better politician in the Senate and this sort of thing, because they have balanced the budget before, and nobody, and even the media, of course, which I hold responsible for doing this, but they don't, saying there's a difference between a budget in your capitalistic business and a budget in the government.
Well, Trump didn't balance budgets. He went bankrupt all the time and stuck everybody with the tail.
that wasn't the perception, though. The perception was that he's a billionaire, and all of this that stuff started coming out much later, because you've created this image with the reality television show, or the so-called reality television show. But we have been pushing this notion for quite some time, way before Trump showed up on the political scene, that a business person would be a better person to do these things because they know how to balance the budget, they know how to handle money, with no one actually saying that those are completely different things. The only thing common about them is the word budget and money. But balancing a budget in the government and balancing a budget for your business is not the same thing. So it's a different skill set. And this notion that he was not a politician, we have been pushing that for a while, and that notion has been, I'm not a part of the Washington elite. I'm not a part of this, not a part of that. And those people get more credibility by what they don't know. That didn't just show up with Trump. So I was not convinced that he couldn't win. I was hoping that he didn't win. My hope was not, realized. But I was not so convinced that he couldn't win, because, like I say, I'm realistic about what this country is.
Fatalistic, because also if you come from the next generation after the Holocaust, you kind of believe that it could always happen again. But Reverend Russ Lee, one tactic I think we're going to look tonight, when each candidate and tomorrow night tries to stand out, is in some cases finding an issue with which to be identified, and trying to convince people this is all encompassing. So you're going to get a smorgasbord of issues thrown at you. And for instance, Governor Jay Inslee, I believe he's the one running on climate change, saying everything else is nothing compared to climate change. That if we don't save the planet and recognize the human role in destroying the environment, that we're going to have global warming, and we're going to have much more devastation you're even seeing every week. Is that a correct strategy, and is it correct on the merits?
It's correct on the merits. It's not a correct strategy. And the reason it's not a correct strategy is often that this country, we're not scientifically thinking. We don't think that way. And a great deal of people in this country believe that the environment and all this kind of stuff is controlled by God, and we have nothing to do with that, and they can be convinced of that very easily. And we also don't respond to things until we actually see the evidence of it in a very real way in our front yard. So the congressmen and the senators bringing stuff to the Senate floor and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, I don't see that. I don't see how that's affecting me. So I don't think it's on the merit, yes. As a strategy, no.
All right. And what about impeachment? So Democrats are divided now about how to confront Trump. Some people think the base will be very excited if you proceed with impeachment. Nancy Pelosi and a lot of other Democrats feel like it's a losing strategy. What Trump wants, it keeps Trump as the focus. There are people like Warren who think we shouldn't be talking about Trump all the time, talk about a different vision, and that you can't win it. The Senate's never going to vote to impeach.
Right.
Other people say you got to do your job. If the president has obstructed justice, you got to pursue it and get the facts out there. Other people say everyone knows the worst about Donald Trump. You're not going to find anything worse in this process. That's going to make you lose energy and just harden the opposition. What's your take on that?
It is a very tricky thing because both sides are right. And they're opposed, but they're both right.
So sometimes people can have opposing ideas that you have to think about in a complicated way.
Exactly. Both of them are right. The fact of the matter is he should be impeached because he has broken the law, and nobody should be above the law in this country. He's put his hand on the Bible that he doesn't understand or know or have read, but he also, held his other hand up and pledged to uphold the Constitution, which he has not done. That's true. Pelosi is right as well because they cannot win in the Senate. And once they lose, we know how Donald Trump does. Donald Trump lies about stuff that he lost. When he actually wins, he's going to soak that for everything it is.
But I did see he did have the largest crowd at the inauguration. I saw the pictures.
He had what?
The largest crowd ever for an inauguration. I saw the pictures.
Yeah. Right. Right. So yeah, that's what he does. But when he wins this, which he inevitably will, because the Republicans have fallen down and they're worshiping at the altar of Trump, they're not going to convict him, and he's going to make it a partisan thing, and he's going to look like a victim, and his people are going to come out even stronger for him.
What about the broader question, Reverend Rossley, about in the debates tonight and moving forward? How much should they say the word Trump? How much should they be talking about Donald Trump? And how much should they be talking about the issues you've talked about, including a new vision for education and community support?
I don't think they need to talk about Trump. First of all, I believe most of the people who are going to pay attention to this debate is the base. So they already know about Trump. You don't have to convince the base about Trump. So it's unnecessary. I think people are looking for what is in your campaign for me. That's what they need to talk about.
All right. And then what about Pete Buttigieg's current problems with community tensions, racial tensions with policing in his hometown of South Bend, Indiana? He had to suspend his campaign, go back there, deal with a white officer turned off his body camera and shot dead a black man accused of breaking into cars. People are mad at him. He's never had white support for his campaign. He does represent this generational change in ways that has excited people just in terms of talking about values and not just talking about Trump. What's your take on this? How significant is that incident, and what's your take on him?
I'm not quite sure, in terms of the incident itself, I'm not sure how broadly that has gotten out. I happened upon it, quite frankly. I think I was on the internet or something, and I saw this thing. I didn't even know it was happening. The person that got shot, I saw when he was out there with the crowd, and they were yelling and screaming. I'm not sure how broadly that has gone out. If other candidates bring it up, it could be an issue for him, and if he hasn't thought about it, a really good way to respond to it. I'm not that convinced that he, he should be the president. I agree with, I think something I read in the New York Times that, he has a bag of party tricks. You can speak this language. He's gone to.
He might make a good vice presidential candidate.
He very well may. But coming from mayor of a relatively small town to the presidency, because of your other resume, that doesn't convince me very much.
What about the generational change argument? Beto O'Rourke's making it. Buttigieg is making it. Bernie Sanders says that's the last ism. We have to tackle ageism. Do you think that these people who want to be president into their 80s are too old? And separately from how old you are to do the job, do you think we need people who look at issues in a fresh way? I'll give you an example. Like, I never thought it was possible that we would have gay marriage legalized, and how quickly that issue moved in my lifetime. I thought I'd never see, but to a younger person, they could.
Mm-hmm.
When Bernie Sanders ran for president, I said to my kid, who was very much for him, and she's in her 20s, I said, well, he's got the name socialist. No one's ever going to vote for that in America, and he almost got the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we need a generational change, someone's younger who looks at issues in free ways, new ways, unfettered by the limitations of our old perspectives?
Unfettered by limitations of
the way we used to see the world, whether it's binary and gender, whether it's Cold War, whether it's what's possible and not possible to convince people to do, where jobs are going to be.
Right. I haven't seen the older candidates. I haven't heard older candidates represent themselves as limited in that way. So I haven't seen it as a major issue, the age thing. I don't see the presidency as a physical job, kind of thing that you got to be in shape for.
Well, they couldn't wake up Reagan by the end when there was an attack overnight, and they didn't wake him up to deal with it, and he had Alzheimer's.
Yeah, but I don't think that necessarily should be applied to every person who's of some age.
Yeah.
That was Reagan's issue, and that was his problem. What was our problem? His issue. But I haven't seen that be, reveal itself as an issue at this point. That, in that way, it could show up later at some point, but I haven't seen it. So finally, I'm not sure.
Joe Biden is polling very highly among black voters.
Mm-hmm.
He had what's come up recently is he brought up his history, being able to work with people he disagrees with. He brought up Senator Eastland and other segregationists in the Senate. He said, even though we disagreed so much, we could get things done. When we looked at the record that's come out the last few days, he, in fact, was an ally of Jesse Helms on issues, and Strom Thurmond and Senator Eastland. He wrote glowingly about them, and he said, I was the middle between them and Ted Kennedy on busing. I had put more people in jail with Get Tough policies.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Helms said he was really our ally in getting some of the stuff passed. Why do black voters at this point seem to be rallying behind Biden, and what do you think of that phenomenon?
I think it's the Obama coattail, whether or not Obama is physically there or not. They attaching him with Obama. I'm not particularly impressed about that. When we, as you say, when we start, first of all, that particular comment, and that I think was kind of a false issue, because he was trying to make a point about, these persons are very extreme in this way, and I was able to work with them, so that shows that I can work with anybody. I think that's what he's trying to say. I don't think he's trying to, lift up segregationists and that sort of stuff.
No, I agree, but what he didn't mention was, in fact, he wasn't trying to work with people who disagreed. He actually agreed with them.
Okay, so yeah, that's the other thing. So that's why I said, that comment itself is one thing. The other thing is the record. When we start looking at the record and see what Biden actually did, he's very problematic, and that's why he's not my guy.
So at this point, you're going with Warren, but it's too early to know who you're really going with. Is that fair?
It's Warren has got to really mess up for me not to go with her. I'm with Warren. I'm with Warren right now.
And I'm with you. Thanks for coming on the air. Now, you love politics. You're very independent. Are you happy that the season's starting so early? Are you interested at all? You say you're going to watch some of the debates?
I have XM on my radio in the car, so I listen to these things oftentimes when I'm in the car. Sometime I will watch MSNBC and that sort of thing on television. But it gets redundant when, like the next host comes in and says the same thing that the other host just talked about. And they act like it's a different show. No, it's just a different Stop. So but politics is always with us. It doesn't matter if the people are running for office or whatever. It's always with us. So I try to stay informed.
All right. Well, thanks for keeping us informed.
Thank you very much.
Reverend Samuel T. Ross Lee of Marion Baptist Church, thank you so much for being on Dateline today. Thanks, folks, for listening. Thanks for writing in. I want to thank the miracle man behind the controls, WNHA station manager Harry Drost, with the assistance of Sam Hadelman today. And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.